Yeah, well, this is the last part, but I think so. You can essentially find very, very similar information in a previous tutorial. So in the last year, so we also did another tutorial, number 10, and you can find the same information and very similar documentation page. And yeah, of course, in the documentation page, we also have everything that I'm going to talk about right now. In this case, it's also that there are assignments, but it's more like focus on the concept of workflows and how you can define your own workflows in NOMAD. And for that, I just use this example, and it's about pretty much about talking about this and how you can do it by hand. This is, by the way, this example is the same that we have in the general documentation for you to know how to define workflows in this YAML schema that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so go into this part very quick. So I'm just gonna very briefly talk about the concepts, then brief mention of this standard workflows recognition that both Nathan and Joseph show about. No, like especially this DFT plus EW is maybe the easiest example, and the concept of how this can be done actually. A little bit in practice, and then I will tell you about these custom workflows and then the assignments associated in the documentation page. And the first thing is that when we talk about workflows in NOMAD, we are talking about how to keep the full provenance of a research workflow that you did, okay? In this case of simulations. And the idea is that we will have these three main section or classes concepts, which are input, output, and task, which in some sense also are very similar to what happened for the simulation-based section. Like we have this model system, model method, which are inputs, the outputs, which is an output, and then the task is the whole simulation, so the whole activity. And that's more or less what we want. And we want to go through all the steps that you did or tasks that you did in the workflow, and then have this very nice structured data to keep the full provenance of a solution. In this case, it's just a workflow in which somebody did some DFT calculation, they did some type binding, and then they did some different methods. So this dynamical mean field theory at different temperatures and at different pressures. Okay, that can be perfectly be like a real case scenario. And so if you see also, if you think about this, this doesn't necessarily need to be simulation specific. The concept of workflows is a pretty abstract thing. And that's why it's also living not under data, but it's living under its own section called workflow 2. Okay, it's workflow 2. And the reason for that is I just told Yemi in the chat if you want to read about it. And okay, but it's a very abstract concept of input, output, and task, and you can do that either in experiment or simulation or in whatever aspect of Blackbird. Okay, and this is very important. You really need to keep what you did in these workflows because this is key for full reproduction. So the reproducibility of what you did during your research project or your scientific project. And most of the papers that are dealing somehow with simulations and science, especially when they are related with high throughput and so on, then they pretty much tend to have these plots where they show the workflow that they did. Okay, but then let's just move a little bit faster. And that's the concepts. And then there are these slightly different ideas, but that they work in the same basis. So it's how do we store the workflow information now? So before we show you how you store actually the simulation, so the activity, but what happens if what you did in your project, it was the combination of several activities, not several either simulations done in series or in parallel, or maybe you did an experiment and a simulation, and then you want to compare the results now. And there are two ways. One is more like the automatic way of recognizing if there is a workflow or not. And the other one is that, okay, it's not possible to be recognized automatically, so then you have to define this workflow manually yourself. So the standard workflows recognition works, this automatic recognition works in the parsers themselves. And for that, you need to add these child archives. So this is not that you need to add, it's that it will be added somehow. The child archives will take care of generating extra archives, no? So that, let's put this way, like you have like some simulation doing DFT, and then you did GW on top of it. Then you can modify the parser of that code under certain conditions in order for NOMAD to recognize, like, okay, somebody did DFT and GW, and this is connected. No, so there is this connection between both tasks. And the way of doing that is through this child archives key that Nathan mentioned in his part. The details are still unclear because I think the structure is not, so we are trying to debug that part. So, but that's how it will work. And there are some guidelines here that I will not come to this. I will actually show you at the very end, if I have like 1 or 2 minutes, I will show you how really it's automatically extracted. And then this is the best case scenario because you just code it in the parser, then you just automate this data extraction, and then you don't need to worry about having to define manually things. But for the situations where this is not possible, then you still have to manually do something. And in NOMAD, we are working, sorry for showing this very ugly piece of code. We are working with these custom schemas, which is pretty much what people in the experimental areas, when they are talking about ELNs, electronic lab notebooks, are using. Because in that case, then they anyways have to fill some blanks anyways, and that's why they are using this. And in our case, we have to rely on that as well. And the idea is that we have like some, the file name, the end of that file name has to be this .archive.yaml, and then it has an extractor, which resembles like the schema that we have. We have some section called workflow tool. So the people in the experimental part, they use, instead of workflow tool that they can also use, they use data, and then they define like the sections here. But in our case, in this case, it's just workflow tool. Then we can define some name. And then the important thing is that we are defining some inputs, some outputs, and then some tasks, okay? And if you see like the picture from before, this one, there are some rules. So then the inputs of some tasks are the outputs of the previous tasks, and so on, in order to make everything connected. Sorry to jump from place. And there is a very important thing, this definition, this m_def here. And essentially this key, what it controls is like if you are calling for the normalized function of the class that you are specifying there. So in this case, there is a class called, or a section called simulation workflow, which is defined in this repository, in this package called simulation workflow schema, and then in this module called general. And in that, for that class, then you have a normalized function. And when you're doing that, then you can call, if you add that, then the normalized function will be called. And that's the idea of defining the standard workflows in a manual way. Then you will have to create your own plugin for your workflow, and then you will have to create this normalized function for that workflow class that you are using. I have an example for that, and it's nice because I think both of them are here in the audience. We are just very recently developing these NEB workflows, Nudge Elastic Band workflows. To my knowledge, this is workflows that tells you about the migration barrier when you are studying catalysis or active centers processes, okay? And the idea is that you just calculate the total energy over like what happens to your simulation cell when like some particle or some molecule or something is moving through that. And it is each of the steps of that molecule moving to that is called image. And then you want to plot essentially the total energy versus these configurations. And we are developing this together. So mainly they are doing this, Julia and Uday. And it's a plugin, so it has the structure of a plugin. And under this SRC folder and NOMAD NEB workflows, there is something called schema packages. And under that, there is something called NEB.py. So there is this module. And under that, there is a class called NEB workflow, which separately inherits from simulation workflow. And then, again, you can define your schema. And then the key is that you will have some functionalities with that child call at the very end on the normalized function. And in this case, because what we're going to have is like a set of tasks, each of them with its own total energy and configuration, so the system information. Then we want to extract that information and then make these nice migration barriers plots, in which we have the total energy and whatever path, it's called sometimes path or configuration we have. And then this relies, so the idea that this will rely on having these functions that are calling the normalized function at the very end. So that there is something called extract total energy differences, and then something that says extract configuration steps, and then that both of them are stored in this class over here, section here. Okay, and with that, I run out of time. I don't know if you want me to show you very quickly the real-time thing. I think otherwise you can also visit the tutorial 10, and then there it's essentially very similar to this part of the tutorial.